Mar-a-Lago, that served as a private residence and exclusive club for 35 years, just became the subject of federal asset seizure enforcement. Not because of criminal wrongdoing, not because of tax evasion. US District Judge Margaret Collins said it herself when she signed the writ of execution. This action reflects the systematic application of existing federal asset forfeiture statutes designed to ensure civil judgment collection. I am Barbara Green, and this is independent investigative journalism. Before we go any further, I need you to do something right now. Hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell. Leave a comment below telling me whether you have ever experienced unexpected asset seizure in your community. Share this video with everyone you know. This is the only official channel for evidence-driven reporting that follows the facts wherever they lead. What I am about to show you is happening in real time across federal districts nationwide, and it is spreading. Here is the core argument tonight in plain language. Federal asset seizure procedures contain fundamental structural flaws that enable property confiscation before guilt is established, creating a system where enforcement precedes justice. This is not about politics, it is about math and legal precedent. Tonight, I am going to walk you through the statutory framework, the enforcement mechanisms, and the human cost, so you can see exactly how we arrived at a legal system where your property can be seized pending judgment, and who is about to pay the price. The seizure process begins with a simple federal court document called a writ of execution. This document directs the U.S. Marshals Service to enforce and satisfy a judgment for payment of money. The writ is issued by the clerk of the U.S. District or Bankruptcy Court under seal of the court. That sounds reasonable. That sounds like justice. Translation: they can take your property first and sort out the legalities later. The United States Marshals Service processes more than 30,000 asset forfeiture payments annually, typically exceeding $500 million to asset forfeiture payees. That is bigger than the entire budget of some small countries. Within 60 days of seizure, cash must be transferred to Marshals' custody. Property ownership transfers immediately upon seizure, pending final judgment resolution. Think about that. 30,000 families, businesses, and property owners annually lose control of their assets before any court has determined their guilt or innocence. $500 million worth of property changes hands based on accusations, not convictions. Maria Santos owned Santos Family Restaurant in downtown Phoenix for 23 years. 3 generations of her family worked those tables, served that community, built relationships with customers who became friends. Federal marshals arrived on a Tuesday morning with seizure paperwork related to a civil judgment. Maria told reporters, "The marshals were professional, but they changed the locks while my grandmother was still inside finishing her morning preparation. 23 years of building this place, gone in one morning. Let that sink in." The legal framework governing federal asset seizures operates under 4 primary statutes. Title 18 United States Code Section 981 covers civil forfeiture. Title 18 Section 982 handles criminal forfeiture. Title 21 Section 881 addresses drug trafficking civil cases. Title 21 Section 853 manages drug trafficking criminal forfeitures. These laws were originally designed to combat organized crime and drug cartels by attacking their financial infrastructure. The evolution tells a different story. What began as targeted enforcement against kingpins and cartels has expanded into routine collection mechanisms affecting ordinary citizens, small businesses, and property owners who have never been convicted of any crime. The U.S. Marshals Service now manages seized real estate, commercial businesses, cash, financial instruments, vehicles, jewelry, art, antiques, collectibles, vessels, and aircraft. They maintain custody of attached property under court supervision or through substitute custodian arrangements. Translation: corporate speak for legalized property, taking with bureaucratic oversight. Federal law requires pre-seizure planning meetings before restraining real property, commercial enterprises, or other significant assets. These meetings must include the Assistant United States Attorney, investigative agents, and the appropriate United States Marshals Service representative. The Justice Manual mandates financial analysis to determine if aggregate liens, mortgages, and management costs approach or exceed anticipated sale proceeds. Here is what the manual says. If financial analysis indicates potential loss, authorities must either determine not to proceed with seizure or acknowledge the potential financial loss and document circumstances that warrant the action anyway. Translation: they are supposed to check if it makes sense financially. They can ignore their own analysis if they want to. Robert Chen owned a 15-unit apartment building in Cleveland for 12 years. 42 families called that building home. Federal marshals served seizure papers related to a civil tax judgment, while Chen was meeting with contractors about elevator repairs. Chen told local reporters, "The tenants started calling me immediately. They wanted to know if they would be evicted, if their rent checks would still be valid, if their security deposits were safe. What do I tell 42 families who did nothing wrong except live in a building I own? I built my life around providing affordable housing. Now I cannot guarantee these families will have a place to live next month." And Robert is not alone. According to Asset Forfeiture Program data, residential rental properties represent the fastest growing category of seized assets, with commercial buildings following closely behind. Processing delays through the Unified Financial Management System average 5 business days minimum, but complex cases involving multiple properties or business operations can extend for months. The math becomes clear when you examine the custody process. Seized cash must be deposited in the Seized Asset Deposit Fund within 60 days of seizure or 10 days of indictment, whichever comes first. But physical property remains in limbo. The U.S. Marshals Service maintains custody, but ongoing expenses continue accumulating. Property taxes, maintenance costs, security expenses, utilities, and insurance premiums become government obligations during the seizure period. Think about that. The government seizes your property, then spends taxpayer money maintaining it, while determining whether you deserve to keep it. The financial analysis that was supposed to prevent wasteful seizures becomes irrelevant once the process begins. Watch the domino chain visualization. First domino, federal asset seizure pending civil judgment. The legal paperwork gets filed, the marshals arrive, property ownership transfers immediately. Second domino, business operations halt completely, because seized assets cannot generate revenue during government custody. Employees face immediate layoffs, suppliers stop receiving payments, customer relationships dissolve. Third domino, mortgage defaults cascade through the financial system because seized property cannot service its own debt. Banks initiate foreclosure proceedings on assets already in federal custody, creating competing claims between government seizure and private lending institutions. Translation: legal process becomes economic destruction with mathematical precision. Maria Santos had 14 employees at her family restaurant. The morning after seizure, she had to tell every one of them to find other work. Her supplier relationships, built over 2 decades, ended with a single phone call. The community lost its gathering place. 14 families lost their primary income source. 23 years of customer loyalty evaporated because nobody wants to eat at a restaurant under federal seizure. Robert Chen faced a more complex cascade. 42 families received eviction notices, not from Robert but from competing creditors claiming priority over the seized building. The federal seizure triggered mortgage acceleration clauses that Robert never anticipated. His personal residence, which he had used as collateral for building improvements, became subject to cross-default provisions. Robert told legal aid attorneys, "I thought they were seizing one building. They destroyed my entire financial life in 6 days, and here is the irony. Federal asset forfeiture policies were designed to ensure that civil judgments get paid by securing valuable property before it could be hidden or transferred." The policy intended to prevent judgment debtors from becoming judgment-proof by protecting assets. Instead, the seizure process systematically destroys asset values through operational disruption, market stigma, and maintenance deterioration. Irony does not care about good intentions. The Unified Financial Management System processes asset forfeiture payments, but the system creates its own delays and complications. All asset forfeiture payees must complete valid UFM's vendor request forms to receive any payments. The U.S. Marshals Service Asset Forfeiture Division reviews submissions for accuracy within 5 business days, but complex cases involving multiple properties require additional documentation, verification procedures, and approval protocols. During this review period, seized businesses cannot operate, seized properties cannot generate rental income, and seized assets continue accumulating maintenance costs, tax obligations, and depreciation losses. The 5-day minimum processing time becomes weeks or months for anything more complex than straightforward cash seizure. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, economics professor at Georgetown University, published research on asset forfeiture effectiveness last year. Her study found that seized business assets lose an average of 37% of their market value within 90 days of government custody due to operational interruption and market perception factors. Walsh told reporters the economic damage occurs immediately upon seizure, regardless of final legal outcomes. Even if assets are eventually returned to original owners, the financial devastation is often irreversible. Think about that. The system designed to preserve asset value for judgment collection actively destroys that same value through the seizure process itself. The math does not work. Let me tell you about Helen Rodriguez. 67 years old, third-generation owner of Rodriguez Family Farm in Fresno County. 127 acres of almond groves that her grandfather cleared by hand in 1952. 3 generations of Rodriguez family worked that land, survived droughts, adapted to changing markets, built relationships with distributors across California and Nevada. Federal marshals arrived last month with seizure paperwork related to tax judgment appeals still pending in federal court. Helen told reporters, "My grandfather cleared this land with his hands. My father planted these trees as a young man. I raised my children in the farmhouse where I was born. The marshals were respectful, but they changed the locks on buildings that have housed my family for 71 years. They posted federal seizure notices on gates my grandfather built. I am 67 years old, and I do not know where I am supposed to live." Let that sink in. 71 years of generational investment, family history, and agricultural production, seized before any court determined final judgment resolution. Helen Rodriguez represents the most devastating category of asset forfeiture impact, legacy destruction that cannot be reconstructed through financial compensation. The bureaucratic machinery operates with mechanical precision regardless of human cost. Federal court writs of execution are normally limited to enforcement within the state where the district court operates, unless extended by federal statute, rule, or court order. The U.S. Marshal maintains custody of attached property under court supervision, but can also name substitute custodians through written agreement or court order. Translation: court supervision means bureaucratic limbo with no clear timeline for resolution. The Justice Manual requires financial analysis before seizure, but that analysis focuses on government cost-benefit calculations, not human impact assessments. The manual states, if financial analysis indicates that aggregate liens, mortgages, and management costs approach or exceed anticipated sale proceeds, authorities must determine not to proceed or acknowledge potential financial loss and document circumstances that warrant seizure anyway. Translation: they are supposed to check if seizure makes financial sense. They can ignore their own analysis whenever they want. Asset forfeiture data reveals patterns that contradict official policy justifications. Residential properties account for 43% of seizures by value, but only 27% result in successful judgment collection, exceeding seizure and maintenance costs. Commercial properties show 38% cost recovery rates. Agricultural properties like Helen Rodriguez Farm average 22% recovery rates due to seasonal income cycles and specialized asset characteristics that reduce market liquidity. The process creates its own momentum independent of legal merit. Once seizure paperwork gets filed, the Unified Financial Management System requires completion of vendor request forms, accuracy reviews, documentation verification, and approval protocols. The U.S. Marshals Service Asset Forfeiture Division processes submissions, but complex cases involving real property, ongoing business operations, or multiple asset categories require additional federal oversight, state coordination, and private sector custodial arrangements. Dr. Michael Torres, former federal prosecutor turned legal reform advocate, analyzed asset forfeiture outcomes for the American Civil Liberties Union. Torres documented systematic violations of pre-seizure planning requirements, inadequate financial analysis, and procedural shortcuts that prioritize government efficiency over constitutional protections. Torres told congressional investigators, "The system has evolved into property confiscation with legal justification added afterward. Due process has been inverted. Now watch the domino effect spread across entire communities." Maria Santos restaurant closure eliminated 14 jobs, but those 14 families stopped spending money at neighboring businesses. The grocery store where Maria shopped for restaurant supplies lost a major commercial account. The local bank that financed her equipment purchases added another defaulted loan to their portfolio. The community lost its primary gathering place for celebrations, business meetings, and family events. Robert Chen building seizure displaced 42 families who found emergency housing scattered across 3 different school districts. Children changed schools mid-semester. Parents faced longer commutes to work. Local services lost 42 households of tax revenue and consumer spending. The ripple effects continue expanding 6 months after initial seizure. Helen Rodriguez farm seizure disrupted agricultural supply chains serving distributors in California, Nevada, and Arizona. Seasonal workers who depended on harvest employment sought work at other farms already operating at capacity. The local equipment rental business lost a major annual customer. 3 generations of relationships with seed suppliers, irrigation specialists, and crop insurance providers ended with federal seizure paperwork. Think about that domino effect. 3 individual asset seizures destroyed employment for dozens of families, disrupted housing for 42 households, eliminated agricultural production affecting interstate commerce, and created cascading economic damage that spreads far beyond the original legal disputes. This is not about politics, it is about math that does not add up. The aggregate numbers reveal systematic dysfunction. Federal asset forfeiture recovers an average of 42 cents for every dollar of property seized, when calculated against seizure costs, maintenance expenses, legal processing, and final disposition. The U.S. Marshals Service annual budget for asset custody and management exceeds the net recovery value in 63% of seizure cases. Taxpayers fund the machinery that destroys private property value more efficiently than it recovers government debts. Legal experts project expansion under current statutory frameworks. The Comprehensive Crime Control Act allows federal agencies to adopt state and local seizures through collaborative enforcement agreements. The Civil Asset Forfeiture Reform Act expanded seizure authority to include substitute assets when primary targets cannot be located. Recent federal court interpretations have broadened the definition of proceeds subject to forfeiture. And it gets worse. Proposed legislation currently pending in Congress would reduce burden of proof standards for civil asset forfeiture, extend seizure timelines from 90 days to 6 months, and eliminate current requirements for pre-seizure financial analysis. The Strengthened Enforcement and Recovery Act, sponsored by representatives from both political parties, explicitly states, enhanced asset recovery procedures ensure judicial efficiency and taxpayer protection. Translation, we are making it easier to take your stuff and harder to get it back. The warning comes from Professor Amanda Chen, no relation to Robert Chen, who directs the Institute for Constitutional Property Rights at Stanford Law School. Chen published predictive analysis showing that current legal trends point toward asset seizure normalization, where property confiscation becomes routine enforcement for any civil judgment exceeding federal threshold amounts. Chen told legal journalists, "We are witnessing the emergence of government-operated property confiscation as standard debt collection practice. The constitutional protections that once required conviction before forfeiture have been systematically eroded through procedural modifications and definitional expansions. This is not theoretical future risk. This is current operational reality expanding under existing legal authority. Here is the accountability question I want you to answer in the comments. Should federal agencies be allowed to seize assets before proving their case in court? Type 1 for yes. The government needs these tools for effective enforcement. Type 2 for no. Seizure should require conviction first. Type 3 for reform needed. Current system requires major changes. I will be reading every response. These are not abstractions. These are your neighbours. Maria Santos built her restaurant dream over 23 years before federal seizure destroyed it in one morning. Robert Chen provided affordable housing for 42 families until government custody eliminated his ability to maintain the property. Helen Rodriguez represented 3 generations of American agricultural tradition until federal marshals seized the farmland her grandfather cleared by hand. Their stories continue beyond our investigation tonight. Maria is working as a server at another restaurant for $12 an hour while fighting to recover equipment worth $40,000. Robert faces personal bankruptcy proceedings because seized property cannot service mortgage obligations. Helen lives with her daughter, while legal appeals move through federal court with no timeline for resolution. What I need you to do right now is share this video with everyone you know. Contact your representatives about asset forfeiture reform. Document any seizure cases in your community, and send me the details for future investigation coverage. This story is not over. It is being written right now in federal courts, marshal offices, and seized properties across the nation. The math we showed you tonight gets worse every month as more assets enter government custody, and fewer property owners can afford legal challenges to recover what they lost. I will be here documenting every seizure, every hearing, every outcome. I will track the proposed legislation that expands seizure authority. I will follow up on Maria, Robert, and Helen to show you exactly what happens when ordinary people face extraordinary government power. Subscribe to this channel because you will not get this coverage anywhere else. Hit the notification bell because these stories develop rapidly and you need to stay informed. Leave comments with your own experiences because this investigation depends on community documentation. Because this story is not about politics, it is about people.